Okay, so where we left off was we have a couple of our methods. We have our index for our controllers, all of those done. The one thing, maybe one other method I want to do before we go to the front end is just to create for our appointments. Let's just get that done and then we can move to the front end. So let's do a def create. And so I can do like appointment equals appointment.new. Create a function called appointment params to sanitize that. So let's go ahead and do that. Will be in the private section of the class, meaning this function is only going to be visible in this class definition. It's only going to be usable in this class. And here we're just going to do a params dot require. So we'll make sure we get the appointment parameter, and then that on there, we're going to allow the date. We'll allow a doctor ID, and we'll allow a patient ID. And yeah, this is pretty just our standard create method. So then I can try to save it. I'll check, this will definitely have a potential of failing if we don't give it a valid doctor ID or patient ID. It will not save to the database. JSON. But if it does, we'll render JSON the appointment. If not, we'll render JSON. Let's do this as. So I'm going to render JSON. I'm creating a hash right here. This is just a hash error, appointment.errors. You just call that errors, appointment.errors.full messages. And then status, 422. That's just our standard create right there. And then, yeah, this one I would want, if I want to test this, I would want like Postman or someone threw in Slack like a extension in VS Code. However you get it to work, it's cool with me. So I just want to do a post to appointments. And then, yeah, I'm going to want to send in some data. So let's make sure, because that is the params.require appointment. So let's make sure that's there. Then we have a date. And then let's do this again, appointment. It's not a user ID, it's a patient ID. I'm pretty sure we have a patient with one, because we haven't really deleted anything, and this needs to be spelled right. Appointment, and then a doctor ID. So we're doing a post API appointment, sending the right data. Thinking this should work. Oh, it's not. Did not get a response. That probably means I don't have my server running. Start up my server. I'm also going to, let's try that again. Doctor must exist. Oh, so I did an ID of 3. So I only have 2 doctors in my database. So let's try it, the one with ID 2. Cool. Oh, my date is null. Well, that's because I called it data here. So that needs to be date. That's good though. It's kind of not doing anything with that if it's not spelled correctly. And there we go. There's my May 5th with 2 quotes around it, which I probably don't want. So that's working. So my create's working. So now, yeah, now I feel like I mean, as far as like the homework goes, and like if this was the homework and this was just like, if I'm looking more at my requirements, as far as the back end, that's like all I really need. Because I have a way to grab all my patients, I have a way to grab all my doctors, I have a way to grab all my appointments, and then I can create an appointment. Now, something I didn't do this time around is I'm not formatting the appointments. You know, we're not doing that custom method to make the appointment data look all nice. Okay, well, that's fine. Maybe we'll try to think about how to make that work without that. And these are decisions like you can make as a developer. It's like, do I want to format it on the back end or on the front end? Sometimes if you have like, I know when I worked at Teleperformances, the back end people were very much in charge in how the data came back. So it'd be a lot of times where they would give you back data that would not match how you would kind of want it to be in the UI. And we'll kind of look at that case today. So we're going to do it a little differently today. Does that make sense what I mean by that? If I do an API like a get API appointments, that's really not how I want the data to look as far as the UI is concerned. I don't want to show the doctor ID. I want to like show the name of the doctor. A lot of times you might get data back like this, and then, you know, the backend people will be like, well, you can grab the doctors with this call, and then you can just on the front end match up the IDs and, you know, get the name, right? We technically just need to do this one call. This is all of our data in the database. There's nothing else. So we should be able to create any UI with just this one object. But we'll kind of explore some different ways to maybe think about that or do it. Okay. So, and I think one of the things that can really help when you're, especially when you're doing full stack development, you know, one of those clear lines you can really separate work is like the back end and front end. So we pretty much have been doing all the back end stuff right now. Now we can kind of switch gears and go to the front end. Like it's nice that we wrote the back end and we know how it works and we can go in and fix it and change it if we need to, but let's just kind of assume right now we're only front end developers and we really don't. Maybe we don't exactly know how our back end's working. And we don't really care, to be honest. So let's come into our client and let's just start doing some front end stuff. So I know for this, I'm going to want a doctor's page. Just by looking at those wireframes, I'm going to want a doctors.js page. I'm going to want an appointments.js page. I'm going to do a new appointment page and a patient.js page. And then for these, just for now, I can kind of just, you know, maybe take one of my files and just kind of stub these out. So just do like, this will be like my patient. Because I kind of like, I like just getting like the React router stuff set up and just getting like these components stubbed out and going from there. This is also a good way to do it if you have like multiple, teammates, because then you can just quickly, create these components, and then you can like break up the work and have people work on the individual components and like the functionality of them. So let's go in here, create those components. Appointments. Okay, so we have those. Now I'll just add them, the links to my nav bar. So I'm going to want to do like, doctors. So my nav bar kind of lives in my app.js. So that's where I'll throw this. So that's doctors. We'll do patients. I'll direct this to the /patients. We'll do appointments. Take us to the /appointments. And then the appointments /new. I can take us to appointments. I'll call this new appointment. That's just what it's going to show up in as our title for the link. So now that if I go look at my app, and I'm going to close out of Postman. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm just trying to reorganize my windows. So if I go to, my React app, refresh, I need to start this. And now I've just added these links. So home, about, doctors, patients, appointments, new appointments. So it's setting up like the URL right correctly, but now it's saying the path is not found. So if I go to /appointments, this path not found, that's because I have not, this is just telling them where to go. I actually need to set these up in my index.js, where I need to say, hey, if someone tries to go to /doctors, render that doctor component. Make sure we import these as we're doing these. Do the same thing with patients. I'm going to change this to patients. It's not really going to affect the functionality, but the readability. This is going to show a list of patients. So I want these files to match what they actually are. So I forgot the S. And we can do appointments. Appointments. More with appointments /new, and that will take us to our appointment, or what did I call that? The new appointment. So just added these 4 routes. Oh, did I do that with doctor too? No. So I called doctor. Let me ask you this question. I import doctor from pages doctors, and now this is called doctor. Is this going to work? Like this file is called doctors. The file's called, this is a little confusing. The file's called doctors. This function's called doctor. So here, this is just some like bad mismatching of naming.
Should work though, right?
Work.
Yeah, it's going to. What if I change this to taco?
That won't work because it's looking for the, well, maybe.
So that works too. So if something's defaulted is exported by default, I can call it whatever. So I want to call this doctors. I have a doctors.js file where I call this function doctor. These don't have to match. That doesn't really matter. This is just a function. I could call this whatever. But you know, it's good convention for these to match. Like it's pretty bad if they don't match, because that's just confusing. So yeah, I go in, I'll go fix because that's worth it to me to go fix those. Even though it works, I want to go fix it because it's going to make my code more readable, less confusing. Sweet. So now I have my doctors component working. There's my patients, there's my appointments, and there's my new appointment. Cool. So that was like that React router step, getting those components set up. If I was with a team, this would be a good time to do a commit. Some pages set up and do a git push. Remember I called my remote taco main. And then they could all push, pull down, and we could break this up into pieces. Cool. So let's talk about like the doctors and patients. So for both of these, I'm just going to do like the on mount. I want to just grab the data. And, this is something we can do a lot of. And this is something that when we did yesterday, we created our own custom hook. Now, since we just cloned down this project, we don't have it. We don't have that useAxiosOnMount. So let's go ahead and let's write this. Well, let's first do this. I think maybe this will be a good way to do it. Is let's first go to our doctors.js and just do it right here, and then we'll kind of abstract it into our useAxiosOnMount. So what do we want to do when we like load data on mount? Well, first of all, I'm going to need use state and use effect. I'm going to want those two hooks from React. I'm also going to want Axios. And I'm going to kind of like throw this down here in like comments. Just as like load data on mount. We need to import tools. Sweet. And then we set up our use effect, or we set up our state. So for this one, it's going to be doctors. Like I'm expecting to get like a doctors array from here, and then a way to set that state. I'm expecting this to be, in an array, so I can just have that be like that. Or I could just have this be null, like by default, this is null, kind of up to us. So the second part is going to be set up state. Now this time I'm going to make this is where I'm going to make this generic. And what I mean by generic, it's not just working for doctors, it's going to work for any type of component that gets data on mount. So I'm not going to call this doctors. I want to call this something generic. Like, what actually is this? Well, this is like data, or maybe I could do like the response. You know, all my Axios calls are going to like get the response. So maybe I call that response. And I don't know if my response is going to be an array or an object or a number. Like, I might not know what kind of data I'm getting back. So maybe on this one, I'm going to want to just set it equal to null. When I'm just doing the doctors, like I know my doctors should be in an array, so I can like hard code it here. But as I'm getting more generic, I'm not sure, like maybe I'm just doing an Axios call to get one object. Maybe I'm doing an Axios call to get a number. Like, it's all possible. That's that state, or that step. The next step is to actually get the data. Right? So we use our use effect. So this, I'll call it get doctors. We can have my const get doctors. And this is going to be our async function. Try catch. Let response equal Axios dot get API / doctors. And then we can like set our doctors to be data. Because here I know that doctors is going to be because I wrote the backend. So I know my doctors is going to be in that response.data. And you know, the other thing I could do here is I could have some loading state. Now, if this is on mount, I'm going to set this to true because, you know, by default, like when this component mounts, I could set this to true. I could also have like an error object. Set that to, maybe set that to null. And then I can like throw these kind of in like this, in this tool spot. And those are kind of like generic. So this is like generic load data on mount. So yeah, what I could do here is, you know, once this is done, I could, you know, set loading to false. Right here, I could also set error to null. Maybe they try it again. I just want to like, if there was an error, I'm going to like reset this state. Here I could set loading to false too, and I could set my error to whatever the error was. So then this becomes like the third step of, you know, load, like, or doing the Axios call. Updating state. When does that come on? State. All of this stuff. Now for this, it's not going to be get doctors. I don't know what it's going to be like. Get some data. So this function get data. Like I don't know what the URL is going to be. So this is like no URL here. And this would be maybe with the way I'm doing this, where I have the response, maybe this is just going to be get response. I'm kind of doing this a little different than I did yesterday, just Why not? So here I could set response. Make this a little more generic. Hey, this is just going to set the response to whatever we get back from our Axios call. I need the await here. Forgot that. Cool. There we go. And then for now, let's just do in a div just to see if our doctors is working. Let's just do a JSON dot stringify our doctor state just to see if it's working. And then I can do something like this. I could do like if loading return loading, if error return error. Because this can kind of be like our third or like even like our fourth step. You know, use our state to render, you know, what's going on. So we could, instead of doing this, we could just like log our response. But we can like, if we're loading, let's return a loader. If we're error, let's return some sort of error UI. If not, we can just do something with the response. So these are kind of like these steps that we do with anything. This is not just doctors. This could be like, hey, I want to do on mount, load my cars. Okay, well, let's get the response on mount. We'll set it. And then we can like use these loading error and response states to do whatever is appropriate. Like if we're loading, we'll return a spinner. If we have an error, we'll return some error UI. If we actually do have the response, then we'll do something with that response. So if I go to my doctors, I'm getting the error. Cool, that's working. Why am I getting an error? Because my server's not running. But that's nice because that's like testing, you know, my UI. It's like, hey, if an error occurs, it's going to say there's an error. It's maybe not the best error handling, but it's something. Start up my server. I saw that loading and now I have the data. Cool. But yeah, I don't want to like, maybe I don't want to like go back and like do all of this work again for my patients and for my new appointments. And I've kind of thought about what are my steps of doing this generically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom hook to kind of do some of this stuff for me. And I'm going to call this useAxiosOnMount.js. I'm going to take all of these like little instructions or like kind of this game plan and kind of use this as a little bit of a guide. Okay, but so first to start, I'm going to create a function. This is just going to match the name of the file. Did I spell Axios wrong? I did on mount. And just while I'm here, I'm going to rename this. All right. So just like I do with like the component, I'm definitely going to want these tools. So let's just go ahead, take these tools and I need to import. I'll just copy and paste these. So I want these two hooks, the use state and use effect, and then I'm also going to want Axios. So right, that's step one. Okay, here's my actual hook. Cool, so I want to do this. I want to set up my state. These out. Sweet, so now I'm gonna have a response, loading, and error, and just a way to like set all of those. So that's cool. Then the next thing I can do is do my Axios call on mount. Let's just take all of this since I spent all this time thinking about this. So yeah, I called this get data. I'm going to switch this to get response. Kind of doing it a little different than yesterday. Instead of getting the data, I'm just going to get the response. So it's going to make this a little more, it's going to give the user, I think, on the front, like who's using it, maybe a little more control. It's maybe going to be a less more specific, but yeah, we'll kind of just look at this. So one thing this needs right here is this URL. There's no way when I'm writing this useAxiosOnMount, I could know what this is going to be. So I'm going to magically just declare that URL. And now if you want to use this, you need to give me a valid URL. All right. So there's that part. Now there's this step 4, use state and to render what's going on. This is actually where we're going to use our hook. So we're going to want to do something like this, like const response. Loading and error. Like this equals our use Axios on mount. This is where we actually give them the URL. And then, when they use it, then they can use this loading, this error, and this response to do what they need to do. This is going to be in another component. This is still part of this because as when I'm writing this, they want to use our hook in another component, and this is how they're going to use it. So this is important to me because this is how I need to return the data. So I'm going to return response. I'm going to return loading. And I'm going to return error from this hook. And then I can actually export default my hook. Cool. So now let's go back to the doctor's component. And let's just get rid of all of this. Let's do this. Let's do const response loading and error equals use Axios on mount. Let's give it the valid URL, which was API/doctors. So now I no longer have this doctor state. I'm calling it response. So let's just throw that there. Now this looks like more than just the doctors, right? There's my doctors, but it's response.data. I got some others because this time around, I'm not setting the response to res.data. I'm just setting the response to the whole thing we got back from Axios. Normally, we've been doing the res.data. But here, I'm just going to give them back the whole response. So this would be like the response. If I wanted to get the doctors from here, that'd be the response.data. See, here's my response. You can see the data key on there right there, which is the doctors. So response.doctors, there it is. Questions on that? So that's that use Axios on mount hook. And then, yeah, now I could like just essentially copy this and go to my patients, paste that on my patients. Like, what do I need to switch here? Let's just switch this to patients. Let's switch that to patients, that URL to patients. That would be patients. There we go. Now, that use Axios on mount hook works. All I need to do is switch the URL to grab that, the patients hit that HTTP request. Okay. I just kind of want to show something maybe a little, like an issue we ran into yesterday is like, if I eventually did want to do CRUD actions on my doctors, it was hard because like this use Axios on mount, like I can't set the, like I can get the data, but now it's hard to set the data. So what I could do, this is a little more advanced, so just kind of try to follow along. What I could do is I could still come in here and create some doctor state. Set doctors. This is going to be equal to use state. I mean, really what I want this to be is the response.data, right? Because that's going to be the doctors once this finishes, but this is an Axios call, so it's going to take some time for that to finish. So that's actually not going to work. And let's just do this. Let's do doctors from response. And let's do doctors from doctors state. And just to show you, if I do like response.data, I mean, this might even throw an error. Let's go to my doctors. Yeah, there's my error. Console cannot read properties of null, trying to read data of undefined. So why is my response undefined? Well, let's look at my, when this, you got to think about when this first loads, my initial state of response is null. And like, I can't really make that anything else. Like, I don't know what that's going to be. So it's going to be null. Like, I have to do the Axios call to like set this data. So I can't do that right here. So I am going to do this for now. I know my doctors is going to be in an array, so I'll set that to an array. So that should fix that error. So now my doctors from doctor state, that's the initial state. But now I want this to change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back my use effect. Let's just do a console.log, mounted. And let's do a console.log. Let's see what our response looks like. So we'll kind of show like a different use case of use effect. Why is that not, did I spell that wrong?
I think you're missing a
You
comma.
got your comma on the wrong spot.
Thank you. Yeah, I did have my comma there. Cool. So let's inspect this. Okay, so I do this call, the response is null. Dang it, like I want to right here, I want to somehow, when my response changes, I want to like set it. Like it's working. I can see like response.date, like it's getting it. What happens when I throw response here? Boom. Now this, remember, if I throw something in this array of my use effect, this now also acts as like a component did update. So, and if I throw response in here, it's going to get called when response has changed. So you can think of like, if it has a empty array, this is like mounted. And then if I have like response in here, this is going to be like response changed. This will also get called on mount technically, but when I log this, I can see the like response changed, and there it is. So what I could do here, oh man, this is going to be a little confusing. Let's do this. So let's do like, because kind of what I'm thinking about is I want to do like a set doctors response.data. And I actually need to call this response. That's what it is. So let's try this. Let's clear it. Okay, first time it breaks. Because remember, this is getting called on mount. So response.data is not defined. So I need to do something like this. If response so if I have a response, let's set that to res.data. See if that fixes it. There we go. So now when I refresh, I have my doctor state. I don't really need that double use effect there. So I can just get rid of that one. Now, why did I do it this way? Well, because now I can do like a const, like add doctor in my state. So I can do like doctors dot add. I mean, I could do like, yeah, I can't add it to my response. So I could do like, because I need that set method. I need this set doctors, you know. And I'm just going to hard code this, like spread out over my doctors and then add a new one. Click add doctor. So now I have a way to add to my state. That's kind of like this this use Axios on mounts because it grabs the data for us and it's nice. But then if we want to I can't go in and set this I can't change this response. I could go in and maybe send back the set response function, but another way to do this, I could still use this Axios on mount, then create my specific state, and then do this weird use effect, if I have the response, then set that to that. So if I have the responses defined, that means it's been updated, it's been gotten. So then I can set that my specific doctor state to what came back. But that's a good use case of well, now I need to use my use effect again, but not on mount. I need to run this effect when my response changes, i.e. once that Axios call finally gets done. So this is the way how you could do it. Because remember, we looked at use Axios too, they don't give you a way to set back that data. So this is how, if you wanted to use Axios and you still wanted to then update your state as this progressed, that's how you could do that. Pretty mind-blowing, huh? So this is a good combo of the two. It's where we're using the hook, but we still don't lose any of that functionality that we had where we could, still have this separate doctor state in this component and then add and remove stuff to it. So what I'm really doing here on this use effect is I need to wait for that Axios call to finish, set the response. And once that is done, then I can set my doctor state. Yeah. All right. Let's go and do that list component as well. And like I said, these ones, I think there's this trade-off. I think there is this trade-off of like when you try to do stuff like this, you try to create these reusable components or reusable functions. It can add some, like they can become complex in a way, especially when you're just beginning. It's probably just easier not to bother with doing any of this because it probably just adds, this complexity where it's like, man, if I can just do everything on this page, then I can see it all. I can see how it's all working. But this really comes like into advantage when you're doing this a whole bunch and you save yourself so much time because you're not redoing these same steps. I mean, right? This is the steps we do when we do a component on mount. It's like the same 4 steps. Like, why do I need to keep on doing this over and over again? But then, yeah, you'll find there's like these weird little like, well, now I need to do something a little special to kind of combine things, which is what we're doing here. It's kind of like hook up like I'm going to just call this credible doctor state in combo with useAxiosOnMount. So for now, we're just like, just stringifying. We're taking our JavaScript object and we're converting it to a string using JSON.stringify, just so we can easily like render this data. But something we do a lot of is we render over lists, and that's something that we looked at yesterday. But let's just redo it. Let's just redo this list.js component. Let's just kind of think once again, what is very common when we have a list? So really, there are 2 things that a list component needs. I'm going to switch up the names again, just think can maybe help you like distinguish what's different. So a list needs 2 things. It needs one, a list, right, of items. We're going to call this data. It needs data. And 2, it needs to be told how to render that data, how it should look. Okay, so let's make this generic list component. We need some data and we need a way to render. And you need to tell me how to render that data. Cool. Sweet, so let's just return. This is just going to be like a list. I'm going to call this function like render list. Go ahead and define this function. So what do we do when we generally like take a list of data and like, we take a list of data, convert it to JSX, using map. Map wants a function to tell it what to return, so map wants a function to tell it how to change each thing in an array. Okay, so we're going to go over our data, which is going to be our list. We're going to map over it. And then we're going to use this render data as the way to tell it how to change each thing. And then we're just going to return that. And you know what? I could do something like this. If I don't get that render data function, well, I can just stringify the data. So if who's ever using the list component, they don't give me the render data function, I'll stringify it. They don't give me data, like throw an error, like if they don't give me data, I'm just going to break. I'll say this, no data. Or I'll say this, data prop is required. I mean, that's pretty like silly. If you're wanting to use a list and you don't even tell me what data you want me to render. Now let's throw this little down here. Questions with this so far? Does just kind of reading this make some sense? Like, hey, if you don't give me data, I'm just going to throw an error. This is how we can actually break the app. This is like a default. No, if we are not told how to render data, and we'll just stringify it. And then here we are told. So just map over it. Map over data and pass the render data function. So let's go look at these cases. Let's go back to our doctors. And I'm going to get rid of this JSON.stringify because let's use my, let's go down here. Let's go down and use my list component. List is not defined. I need to export default. And then go back to my doctors and go ahead and do that. List. That's imported. I guess I'm not using Axios anymore here, so I can get rid of that. Inspect. Where's the error occurred? Uncaught. So I got my data prop required error. It's kind of like maybe not the best way, but I can kind of see like, you know, I'm not giving that a data prop, so I threw an error. Okay, so let's go give this some data. I'm going to give this some doctors. And doctors on initial state, that's going to be an empty array. Cool. That's good enough for my list component. Let's see if that fixes it. Nope. Undefined is not a function. So that's in my list.22. Render data.map. Undefined is not, is my data undefined? Wait, undefined is not a function. It's like my data is defined, but the map is not. How are we not getting here? Oh. Okay, what? Okay, so I confused myself a little bit, but something I want to do, I'm kind of forgetting one thing here. Something pretty like, so in my mind, I'm like, why am I getting to line 22? Because I haven't given this the render data prop. Like I was kind of expecting this to stop right here. Because if there's not a render data prop, I just want to, stringify it. But what did I forget to do?
You forget an else.
I could do an else. It's still like, it still should be showing the stringifying data. An else would kind of work, but it really wouldn't. I'm forgetting the return. If I don't have the render data function, I want to stringify this data, but I want to return it. And there we go. So I was forgetting to return that. So therefore I was trying to like return this data.map. So that wasn't defined, like render data wasn't defined. So that was my error. And like an else would have prevented that error, but I still would have had the problem of it not giving me my stringified data. So that's good. And yeah, like for this one, let's just do another one. So yeah, this one, like this first one doesn't have that render data function. So it just stringifies it. Let's do a render data function on this one. So I need to pass it a function that's going to ultimately go to my map. So you can kind of read this as like doctors.map, and this is the thing I'm throwing inside of the map function. So we could do that, call that D for short for doctors, and this can return div. Close off that div. D dot name. No render data. And this one does have a render data. So, and just read the, like, just kind of like, forget about the code, but just kind of like, this is very readable. I have a list. Here's your data, and here's how you render that data. Like, here's how you render each piece. So I have a doctors array. Okay, go through each doctor, return a div with like their name. And, I probably want a key here as well. We'll use the ID. And there we go. Now, say as you're starting out, like writing this list component might be a little confusing, but I think writing it, or like writing the useAxiosOnMount, maybe that's a little confusing, but you might see like a third-party library that has something like a list component where you give it data and then you pass it this render data function. I'm pretty sure Ant Design has something like this. Like if we look at their components, I forget. Search list. Do they have a list? Let's look at their API. They have it, they call it, so they have a data source. And that's an array of any, and they have a render item. And see, that's a function where you like return a React component. So if we to like maybe look at some of these codes, here's their data. There's their list. They have a data source. We pass it the data, and then they have a render item. You know, go give it the data, and here's how you go through each thing and render it. And then we've just kind of shown how like maybe behind the scenes, how you could build that. And so, yeah, the render item might be a better name for that. Maybe that's a little more clear. It's not going to change the functionality, but maybe that, I don't know if that makes it a little more clear of what this is actually doing. Maybe I could call that like data list. Just data source, data list, whatever data. But does that kind of, that's all they're doing. We give it a list. Looks like you can give theirs like a grid prop, but you know, behind the scenes, it's just very similar to what we just built. Like we want to add a header to our list. Sure, that's no problem. Let's add a header. And let's make it optional. So I could do something like this. Header, was a header prop given? Okay. Let's go ahead and use it. So this way we can like have a lot of like optional props. Like, was the header prop given? Okay, let's use it and just, you know, wrap it in an H1. So now I could go to my doctors, and you know, not all my list needs a header, but now I can give it a header. Back to my React app. Oh, render data is not defined. Oh, I think I did it right here. Render item. So since I changed the name of that there, I need to change it everywhere in my function. And now like my list can have a header. But yeah, you can like think about maybe all this more, you could just keep on adding functionality to this list, like loading, a load more, pagination. Like you can make this like nice and see how this is like kind of showing you that it's loading. And maybe get like this UI, 20 items loaded. So you could think of something like a list that's pretty maybe simple, but then you know, it's really, is it that simple? Maybe you want to start adding a whole bunch of functionality to this. So cool. Let's take a break. Any questions on this though? I'm going to add this and push it.
It's just good to see some of the repetition and kind of see it again.
Yeah, and I did do it just a little differently. So hopefully it's
Yeah.
not going to be the same, but it's kind of like, it's the same idea. It's really trying to think about those things that you constantly do.
Yeah, it's good to see it done a different way.
So if you can like kind of break it, like with our useAxiosOnMount, if you can like break it up, and this is hard, like to like abstract it to like, what do we consistently do for each thing? And then you try to write that into a function. All right, let's take a break. Let's come back at, what time is it? 12:11. Let's just do 12:20, just a shorter break. 12:20.